Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi alladhi anzala Qur'anan Arabiyya wa hadana siratan sawiyya wa salatu wa salamu ala Muhammadin alladhi bu'itha rasulan nabiyya wa ala alihi wa sahbihi alladhina salaku tariqan maradiyya amma ba'd. First and foremost, I'd like to greet everybody who's viewing this podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. We have our first ever Palmer's Green podcast, which we would like to present to you all today. And it's something which is quite important, something which has been on our mind for some time. We do have a very special guest, and that guest is none other than Dr. Zafar Iqbal, who some may have seen him around in the masjid from time to time, especially during the Eid Salahs and perhaps during Ramadan as well. Just to highlight a few of some of the credentials of our guest today. So Dr. Zafar Iqbal is a consultant in sports and exercise medicine and is currently the head of sports medicine in Crystal Palace FC. He's also the chairman of the FA Medical Society and chairman of the Premier League Doctors Group. He's also a lecturer at Queen Mary University in sports and exercise medicine. And he is a campaigner for DFibs and healthy exercises. He's worked with a lot of Muslim athletes, and not just within the world of football, but also with cricketers from Pakistan. And he has previously been the head of sports medicine at Liverpool FC for 5 seasons. And he's been the first team doctor at Tottenham Hotspur as well. So you would have perhaps regularly seen him on the TV, on the bench. He is an individual who is quite prominent, especially in his profession and as a Muslim within his profession as well. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Dr. Zafar, that he increases you in your greatness and that he accepts your services as well. In fact, one of the ways and one of the questions that may appear at this juncture is that how did I get in touch with Dr. Zafar, which is quite a fun story in that a couple of years ago, I had an ACL injury whilst playing football. And unfortunately, it happened just before Ramadan, which required me to lead the Eid Salah thereafter. Unfortunately, I couldn't, because of the damage which was done to my knee, I was unable to lead the prayers, but I did give the khutbah accordingly. But one of the things that I mentioned before the khutbah actually started was, or before the salah and the proceedings, is that I won't be able to lead the prayer. However, we will have one of our junior imams leading because unfortunately I have damaged my knee. And thereafter, once the salah had finished, Dr. Zafar caught up with myself, and he was questioning me and asking me regarding my knee, the situation, what the doctors have said. And this is something commendable because he didn't need to. I mean, this was totally out of his own kindness. And I didn't know at this juncture who he was. I recognized his face from somewhere, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly where. And after we got talking, I realized he was the head team doctor at Crystal Palace, or the head of sports medicine, and he had previously held this position with Liverpool. And from then onwards, Dr. Zafar was kind enough to meet me on a regular basis to check the situation with my knee, and through his guidance and his continued support, I've been able to make a recovery accordingly. So, Dr. Zafar, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam, and Jazakallah for that very kind introduction.
Oh, no, you're most welcome. You're most welcome. I think as far as Ramadan is coming, and with all the things that are happening, in our current time with COVID, I think this is a good place to start. So with Ramadan coming, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. That fasting has been made fard upon you, just like it was made fard upon the nations that came before. And the reason for this is so that you may be more mindful of God, or so that you may develop awareness. Since you have had extensive experience in the Premier League, how would you say Ramadan is spent, not only by yourself, but by players within the Premier League, or within other sports that you've delved into from time to time? So that's the the first question that I want to present to you before we start talking more about things which are perhaps more topical or relevant to individual Muslims regarding their diets and their health during Ramadan.
So Ramzan, obviously, as we all know, it can be a very testing times just for anyone who isn't involved in physical activity, and of course, those that participate in regular physical activity, and especially something as strenuous as football, Ramzan poses additional challenges. So I've been quite fortunate in all the clubs that I've worked at that the other staff, we've had several Muslim players and staff there, and the clubs that I've worked at, both Tottenham Hotspurs, Liverpool, and also Crystal Palace, the managers, the medical team, the sports science staff have been very understanding and of certain players who have decided to fast. So the first thing is that we try and raise awareness so that the staff within the club know that there may be some Muslim footballers there and some of them may be fasting. And then what we do is we open the dialogue with the players in terms of how best we can support them. So if I can give example, at Liverpool, we had Kolo Toure
Mhm.
and also Osama Saidi, who were both fasting. And at that time, it was during pre-season, so the hours were long. And normally we would be doing a double session. So Brendan Rodgers, who was the manager at the time, understood that these two players were fasting during training. And so again, he would be very accommodating in that instead of the players having to do double sessions, they would do a session maybe towards the end of the day. So by that, they could then open their faster iftar. And so again, the club would, we would engage with the nutritionist and make sure that we could try and get the best foods for the players if they decide to fast.
Mhm, mhm. In terms of limitations during Ramadan, I mean, you must have worked closely with the players. Did you find that Ramadan increased their intensity or perhaps lowered their intensity in the things that they were doing? We've heard, lots of information of athletes using intermittent fasting or fasting in general as a means to strengthen their performance in some areas.
So if you look at the science,
Mhm,
we know that, of course, during a strenuous activity, over 90 minutes like football,
mhm,
you're going to lose fluid
mhm,
even more than you are obviously during the day when you're fasting, especially in hot weather. So, and for an athlete, hydration is obviously very important because studies show that if you lose, even 5% of your body weight in fluid, which you can easily do during a game, then your performance can decrease physically by 20%. But when I speak to the players, so for example, Kolo has often spoken about this, and also cricket players like Moeen Ali and Sonny Bill Williams, who have also fasted and competed at the highest level. When I speak to them, they find that mentally, spiritually, it helps strengthen their iman.
wow,
And so what they feel is that any physical effects,
mhm,
they combat that because of their mental strength is increased.
mhm,
And we all know in sport, half the battle is also from a mental perspective, because if you are willing and able to put the effort in, then is also important in performance. So all these athletes that I've spoken to, they've said that although they may feel tired, their concentration may, they may find it a little bit difficult. In other ways, they find that their mental strength and discipline increases further, and that combats, some of the physical um, side effects they may feel as a result of fasting.
right, right. So bringing the discussion more perhaps relevant for our Muslims who may not be athletes, our local Muslims at Palmer's Green or even outside, and those who are watching this discussion. With Ramadan around the corner, what are your best dietary tips? And we'll be speaking a little bit more regarding various diets, the keto diet, etc., low carb, high protein diets, a balanced diet, and weight loss in general shortly. But just as a summary, what are your best dietary tips for individuals during this blessed month?
I think the key thing is making sure that the kinds of foods that you eat are not high in sugar or not high in the wrong types of fats, the wrong types of carbohydrates. The main reason for this is that we know that during fasting, your body during the day will go into storage mode.
Mhm.
And so, if you're not careful when you're opening your fast during iftar, if you suddenly take on huge amount of the wrong type of foods, all that will end up happening is that your body will try and store them because your body's thinking, hang on a sec, I've not had food for a long period of time,
Mhm.
so I need to store this because I don't know when my next meal is. So what we advise is open your fast, have a date, have some water, have some milk, then obviously go and read your prayers. Then after that, have a small meal. Again, making sure that it doesn't contain too much sugar. So don't just pile on, a whole load of samosas and sweets, just thinking that yes, I've fasted the whole day and now's my time to, have the right kind of foods. So small meals between iftar and sahri is really important. And again, making sure that what you don't want to do is reverse the positive effects that you've had, the benefits that you've had of fasting,
Mhm.
and just by consuming calories which your body doesn't require.
Sure. So, okay. So, this leads me on to another question. You mentioned that there should be a balance between carbs, proteins, and fats. Um, what I found in my experience is that sometimes when we're discussing nutrition with individuals who perhaps haven't had experiences or any experience regarding nutrition and are just used to labeling foods as rice and pastas and chicken, etc., without giving them or putting them in the categories such as carbs, proteins, and fats, what you find is that there's a lot of confusion as to individuals, as to what they should eat. And therefore, when we're saying carbs, proteins, and fats, could you kindly like give an example of what a typical iftar should consist of? Because we have rice, but we have different types. We have pastas, we have different types as well, and you could eat, the same amount of both, but the effect that it would have on your body would be completely different. So, what would you suggest in terms of good practice with different types of foods? And I'd like you to also, perhaps touch base upon cultural foods. So, for example, I know within my family that if I was to bring brown rice on the table, everybody would have question marks. Rather, they've got a more focus towards foods which have perhaps greater spices, or foods which are supplemented with samosas or spring rolls, etc. So, what would your guidance be in this regard?
So what you want to, so for iftar, as I say, uh, a small amount of sugar is fine. So with regards to a date, so that's fine. So initially to give you the immediate energy,
Mhm.
then what you want to do is have foods which try and release energy slowly. So these are the types of carbohydrates which will release energy slowly. So as you mentioned, most Pakistani diets will have rice, and that's usually white rice.
Mhm.
Now, that again is fine in moderation. It's a good source of carbohydrate, but the disadvantage is that it will make your sugar levels go up quite quickly.
Mhm.
And then what ends up happening is that your body will just try and store that. So what you want is foods which will release carbohydrates slowly, if you're going to have larger amounts of those. So those kind of foods are unfortunately, some do frown upon them and say they don't taste as nice. So as you already mentioned, brown rice. If you're going to have chapati, then make sure it's with wholemeal flour as opposed to just white flour. So anything, so we could, the easiest way of splitting up is into white carbohydrates and brown carbohydrates.
Mhm.
So anything with white flour, so white pasta, white rice, white bread, is going to be what we call quick release carbohydrates. But those, unfortunately, are more likely, not only will they not fill you up for a long period of time, the body is more likely to store them. Whereas if you have the foods which release energy slowly,
Mhm.
such as a brown rice, brown wholemeal pasta, those type of foods will release carbohydrates or energy slowly over a long period of time.
So, for example, for individuals who perhaps want to diet in accordance with the things that you've highlighted, but would like to do so while still maintaining or still staying true to their cultural foods, would a dish, for example, brown rice with a broth like a chicken curry or a chicken salan of some nature be ideal, or perhaps
Yes,
would it be
no,
too
no,
calorific?
no. Again, as with anything, it's small amounts over is far better. So what? So the best way of describing it is rather having two big meals.
Mhm.
So just having one large meal at iftar and one large meal at sahri. What's going to end up happening is that if you consume a huge amount of food, the body doesn't know what to do with it other than store it.
Mhm.
So what we recommend is that if you can have at least three small meals spread throughout the night,
Sure.
if possible, even four, because what ends up happening is that the body will use that slowly and not just try and store that. Because the last thing you want to be doing, and we all struggle with our weight and trying to keep as we get older, the last thing you want to be doing is get into a position where you're gaining unnecessary fat.
Sure.
So have those kind of foods, as I say, which release energy slowly. Just change things around. Instead of having white potato, see if you can have foods like sweet potato.
Mhm.
And again, I appreciate it may not be to everyone's taste, but having foods like sweet corn, kale, lentils, these kind of foods which release energy slowly and are much less likely to be stored in the body are far better.
Sure. So we've spoken regarding good practices, and your response has been quite detailed. But what about the don'ts of Ramadan? Things that would perhaps cause us fatigue prior to Taraweeh, perhaps cause us laziness in worship. I mean, we're naturally going to be fatigued to some degree during the day because of the absence of food within our lives. However, depending on what we eat at iftar, that could also have positive or negative consequences on what's going to follow in terms of our ibadah and worship. So what would you say are the absolute don'ts of Ramadan, or perhaps things that we should keep an eye on whilst we are eating iftar, or even the meals that we spread across during the night and before suhoor, before we actually go to sleep?
So I keep going back to it. I think the key one is making sure that you don't consume large amounts in one go.
Sure.
Avoid sugary drinks. Avoid, if you can, foods like the white potato and especially large amounts, fried foods, because the main reason is that these foods are going to do two things. One, they're going to release uh, energy very, very quickly, so you'll get a spike, and that will also make you feel quite tired as well.
Mhm.
So as I said, small amounts of foods. Make sure you have plenty of fluid throughout the night as well. Avoid caffeine if you can,
Mhm.
because we know that's a weak diuretic in the sense that it can make you lose water quickly. Have fluids which contain, you can get electrolyte tablets. A lot of our athletes will take water with electrolyte tablets. And what that does, it makes the fluid what we call isotonic. So it means that the fluid will stay in the body for a
Right.
longer period. So again, try and consume between 2 to 4 liters, but rather than just in one go, spread it out throughout the night. And I appreciate that's difficult because at some point you've got to try and get some sleep as well. But the key is not having any foods which are uh, small amounts are fine, but large amount of food which are fried, which contain lots of white carbohydrates, and foods which contain lots of sugar. Because all they're going to do, yes, they'll make you feel good for a short period of time, but then afterwards the negative effects is that they're going to make you feel sleepy and they're going to get stored.
Right. So, just out of the things that you've mentioned, I just want to focus a bit upon caffeine because many of us, after we've, completed our iftar and before Taraweeh, we like to have a bit of coffee or a bit of tea, etc. What would be a better alternative to keep us awake, you could say, during Taraweeh or perhaps later during the night?
So I think for iftar, it's fine.
Sure.
because what the key step is, and what I would say is a no-no, is having coffee for sehri,
Hmm.
because then what ends up happening is that you have that not uh, again, being a diuretic, it means that you're going to lose fluid quicker, so and quite quickly. So after sehri, so what you want to be doing is certainly for sehri, you want to be making sure that's the time to have the fluids with the electrolyte tablets, not too much sugar, so that stays in the body the longer. So a coffee is fine if it's at iftar, but I wouldn't recommend it for sehri.
Brilliant. Okay, so the next question, and perhaps this is the golden question. I mean, this is a question which many of our youngsters and many of our senior, people within our community ask, and that's quite simply, regarding weight loss. So many of us pre-Ramadan, we have a lot of goals or objectives that we would like to, achieve throughout this month. In terms of our Quran, in terms of our Salah, just our, development as far as our spirituality is concerned. Perhaps many of us also see this month as a time where we can lose weight naturally. I mean, because where our consumption of food has decreased substantially during this month. So I guess the golden question is that what would be a typical diet plan for a person who wanted to lose weight? Now, I appreciate that you've previously mentioned that everything is to eat in moderation and to space things out and to basically have smaller portions than you would usually have. And I assume that would put an individual naturally within or in a calorie deficit, or perhaps just bang upon the amount of calories they need to consume in order for their body to function well. But what if a person was perhaps a bit more disciplined, or a person could control themselves a bit more? What would you suggest for such an individual who actually wanted to look at this particular month as a means of losing, a lot of weight that they have gained throughout the year? And in particular, I want your advice regarding things such as keto diets, or Atkins diets, or low carb diets in general during this month. I mean, by employing a low carb diet, are we effectively dropping an axe on our foot as far as other things are concerned in terms of our worship and the things that we're going to use to fuel our body? Or are these things some things which we can actually do and be successful with, provided that we are disciplined? So yeah, your views on this would be much appreciated.
Sure. So the best way of trying to lose weight, as you say, it's basically a calorie deficit, and uh, trying to have those kind of foods which are going to be, uh, as I say, not energy dense, and are not going to be stored quickly. So what we advise normally, if somebody's trying to lose weight, take Ramadan aside. So in our footballers who may come back at the start of a season and have gained some body fat, what we do with them is put them on a low carbs diet. So they cut out as much as they can in terms of the carbohydrates.
Mhm.
They get their energy from protein and the right kind of fats, and a small amount of carbohydrate is fine. At the same time, with those players, especially in the morning, we will get them doing what we call fat burners. So
Mhm.
they'll do about 20 to 30 minutes trying to burn even more energy. That
Mhm.
obviously can be difficult during Ramzan, especially early in the morning. So for me personally, I think Ramzan is not the right time if you're trying to lose huge amount of weight, because it can be difficult. I think the best way to do it is obviously, as you mentioned, uh, reducing the amount of carbohydrate, but then that can have an effect too, because carbohydrates are important in terms of concentration,
Yeah.
and you may not be able to get the right amount of energy, and you may feel even more tired than normal. So
Mhm.
for me, during Ramzan, most people are going to lose weight as long as they don't, as long as it be sensible, because unless you're doing regular weight training, which again is hard, most people are going to lose muscle, and we
Mhm.
know, per volume, muscle weighs more than fat,
Mhm.
and so you're going to lose muscle, you're going to lose fluid, and so people will normally lose weight during Ramadan anyway.
Sure.
As I say, if you want to accelerate that, the main thing is by diet as opposed to trying to increase your physical activity, and so low carbs is the key one to do that. But bearing in mind that will put additional stresses on the body. Um, So, as I said, anybody who's not eating food for a long period of time, the body it does two things. So, one, it tries to think, okay, where am I going to get energy from? Okay,
Mhm,
so it can either do that by breaking down protein from your muscle or your fat stores. Now, that in itself requires a lot of effort.
mhm,
So, the body does either one of two things. So, it either says, right, I'm just going to shut everything down and I'm going to slow everything down because I don't know when the next meal is. So
mhm.
your metabolism slows down
Sure.
and you can then feel a little bit more tired, you feel more sleepy. Um, but to try and combat that, what people then do is that they will do more activity.
Mhm,
So they will force the body to actually try and burn the fat. So that's why people go into low carb diet and at the same time they will do what we call fat burners
mhm.
and they will exercise hard to force the body into try and burn the excess fat.
Sure.
Okay. If you're not fasting, then that's not a problem because as soon as you've done the activity, you can then take energy by protein drinks, and that can help the body, give you some energy. However, if you try and exercise hard and you've got low carbohydrate diet, that I think would have an even more negative effect on the body in terms of you feeling tired, even more
Mhm,
tired. So if you are going to do it, as I say, Ramzan for me personally isn't the time to try and think, right, I'm going to get myself fitter than
mhm,
ever before. I think the key things that we say to athletes is trying to minimize any loss of muscle, try and maintain your any fitness levels that you have by doing a small amount of regular physical activity. Uh, but certainly you can try and get into the pattern of reducing the amount of food that goes in
mhm.
and then making sure that you have the right kind of foods that go in and just build up a routine like that.
Sure. So I want to touch upon exercise. So usually we refrain from exercising during Ramadan for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it might be out of fatigue. Sometimes it's purely because of time better spent reciting the Quran or additional salah, etc., etc. However, many of us still do want to exercise. Many Muslims still want to engage in weightlifting. Others want to just exercise just for especially during things like lockdown, just in order to feel better about themselves as well. Is this a valid approach, or should we focus, more on, other aspects of Ramadan? What would your advice be in this regard?
I think there's three different strategies. I think it is important to maintain some level of physical activity
Hmm.
because of the positive effects of that. It can help control your blood sugars and it can help with a carefully controlled diet, can
Hmm.
help in terms of maintaining your muscle bulk, which you may have worked hard on the rest of the year.
Hmm.
So if you're going to do physical activity, there are three times that one can do that. You can either do that just after Sehri. The
Hmm.
advantage of that is that you've got energy on board, so you may feel that you've got enough energy to be able to do the activity. The disadvantage of that is that it's going to be a long time. You have to wait till iftar before you can then have any further food or fluid. So you have to be careful of what type of physical activity you do then. So maybe a little bit of strength training is fine to do that just after Sehri. The other time to do that is just before iftar.
Hmm.
So if you wanted to do either weight training or a light run, the other advantage of that is um, your glycogen, which is the energy store within the muscles, will have been used up during the day.
Hmm.
So by doing some exercise just before iftar, that's like doing the fat burners first thing in the morning. So your body is forced to try and burn some fats. So there is a big advantage of doing some exercise just before iftar. And then you know that obviously at iftar, you'll be able to take on a protein drink and some fluids so you don't feel too fatigued immediately afterwards. And then the third strategy is some will fast in at night. No, you're not fast. Sorry, will play sport at nighttime.
Hmm.
So I've heard of various Muslim leagues, football that play around about midnight. So after Tarawih prayer,
Hmm.
certain football clubs will allow their facilities to be used by the local community to play five-a-side football, so to speak. So the obvious advantage of that is you're not tired, but you're able to do some physical activity. So there's three strategies. The one that I'd probably recommend is that you try and do some training just before iftar, because you're able to burn additional fat,
Hmm.
and then at the same time you're able to then make sure you're well hydrated, shortly after, by opening your fast.
Sure. So, in terms of, I mean, you've highlighted what a good exercise program would look like. However, different people have different strengths and flexibilities in terms of the things that they can or can't do. What type of exercise would you recommend? I mean, you did mention strength training regarding weights, etc. Perhaps the gyms aren't open, or perhaps individuals don't have access to dumbbells and barbells and the like. What would you advise just for the a common individual who perhaps might have some bands at home, and perhaps also for our sisters as well, who perhaps during the day will be incredibly busy, or maybe at some point later on the day, they are focusing on children, and perhaps they don't have enough time to exercise to a great degree, but do have enough time to exercise perhaps a little bit. What would a good exercise program look like for an individual who doesn't have the resources or the materials required?
Sure. I think we're quite fortunate. I mean, even in this lockdown period, there have been lots of ways in which people can exercise. So, myself, if I don't have all the equipment at home, we can do lots of exercise with body weights. You can do HIIT exercises, so that's high intensity interval training, just by using your own body weight. Various movements such as squats, push-ups, press ups, burpees. So those kind of activities, even for 15-20 minutes. And there's lots of YouTube channels that one can, switch on and see that there's various instructors that are able to do this.
Mm.
My wife has got into a routine with her sisters, just to go online via Zoom or WhatsApp videos, and they will exercise among themselves in terms of aerobics. So the sisters will do that all themselves, and they've got themselves into a routine as well. So I think we're very fortunate that there are various ways that one can do that without specialist equipment. So what people want to be doing is ideally between 20 to 30 minutes of physical activity, and even things like, as I said, going up and down the stairs, squatting, lunges, which can all be done without any specialist equipment. And you will find that will help maintain strength, and you can get the heart rate up, which is what you try and do with any physical activity.
Sure, sure. Finally, as we're coming towards the end of the session, I do have an eye on the clock as well. Many of us within the Muslim community are perhaps suffering from, various illnesses. Some may have high blood pressure, others may have issues with their cholesterol, others are suffering from gout, others are suffering from diabetes, and perhaps maybe in future we could bring you back for a short lecture on things that individuals who are suffering from some form of illness could use during the month of Ramadan. But in general, what would you advise in such instances? I mean, we know Islamically, depending on the severity of an illness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made concessions for such individuals. But perhaps some of these fasts can be manageable by living a certain way prior to Ramadan and even during Ramadan. So what would you suggest for individuals who are perhaps a bit anxious pre-Ramadan regarding the length of the fasting and the effects that it might have on their body?
I think it's really important that they get in contact with their GP. There's lots of good information out there now, especially people who are, say, type 2 diabetics, who have got high blood pressure, and advice can be given by the individual GP, because uh, you know all these illnesses, they have varying different needs and
Mm,
different severities.
mm,
So it's really important they speak with their GP, make sure that it's safe for them to fast, and that they can find out from them also in terms of what advice that the GP gives them before they actually commence on a fast, because what they don't want to do is make themselves more unwell as a result. And again, there are like the Diabetes Society. Um, they've also got lots of advice for people who are going to be fasting, and who are type 2 diabetic in particular, and in terms of how they can do that safely. So I think anybody starting fasting, or certainly in terms of starting a new health program, they should always discuss with their own GP first, as opposed to just what they read, because it is really important, because it is very individual depending what medication they take.
Sure. Are there any health supplements that you would recommend during this particular month? Many individuals are into taking various capsules that may have natural supplements which will help them with their vitamins, etc. Are there things that we should perhaps use as supplements in order to complement our diet during this month?
I think the probably one in terms of multivitamins, and that can always help, because if you're not getting them enough during the day, so multivitamins that help with wide variety of things, but more importantly in terms of the immune system.
Sure.
So things like vitamin C. The other key one, and especially among Muslim women, but also Muslim men as well, we find, especially among the South Asian community, our vitamin D level can be very low.
Right.
And so it's really important that if you can get that checked out, and then
what
you
would be the
supplement
effect? Sorry to interrupt you, but what would be the effect of a low vitamin D level? How would that manifest itself?
So low vitamin D, there have been studies which show that an optimum vitamin D level can help reduce infections. It can also help you feel less tired. And in some people, it may have an effect with regards to improving their physical performance as well.
Right.
So in our footballers, we always checking their vitamin D levels, especially during winter, because it can drop. And so we supplement that. But recent evidence also shows that vitamin D may be important in reducing infection, especially with COVID as well. There have been some research which suggests that low vitamin D levels may have had an effect on people having an increased chance of picking up COVID.
Finally, to conclude the list of questions which we received and from within the community, and which we formulated ourselves as well. The final question which has come up is regarding sleep during Ramadan. Now, sleep even outside of Ramadan is core, and it's important just for our functionality during the day. How about during Ramadan, where many of us like to spend, the evenings in some form of worship? How would you suggest or how would you suggest that during the day, how should we use our time in order to, distribute our sleep as well? Because I think, without doubt, there will be many of us who won't get a full sleep, which is from 8 hours. I mean, by the time we've read the Taraweeh, some will also want to have perhaps prayed Fajr Salah in the masjid, and depending on the various timings that will entail, some of us may get 4 hours of sleep, some of us may get 5, some of us may just about scrape 6 hours of sleep as well. So what can we do during the day in order to restore some of our sleep, and how can we ensure that an excess of sleep during the day won't cause us to be lazy or cause us further fatigue during the evenings as well, regarding our day-to-day patterns?
So you're right, and again, if I refer back to the athletes, sleep is one of the areas which is really important, especially for recovery and muscle growth. And so for the athletes, what we recommend, and we know that during Ramadan sleep can be disturbed, we recommend that they have short naps during the day. So maybe what we call a power snooze for about 45 minutes. Certainly don't recommend sleeping 5-6 hours during the day, because for me that negates the effect of the benefits of Ramadan in the first place, because the whole point is you're meant to carry on with what you should be doing during the day. So it doesn't mean that because you can't sleep at night that you sleep during the whole day. And if anything, that'll probably make you feel even more tired, because again the body thinks, well, hang on a sec, I'm I'm just sleeping, I don't need to do anything, and the body again goes into this sort of shutdown mode. So a power snooze for about 45 minutes in the middle of the day, or late afternoon is fine, and should and actually people will feel a little bit more refreshed as a result of that.
Sure. So that brings us to the end of our questions. Before I ask you for your concluding thoughts regarding this Ramadan, one thing that I do want to highlight is something that you quite eloquently picked up upon previously. That whilst discussions of weight loss and dietary practices and do's and don'ts of Ramadan are incredibly important, as things like weight loss, etc. It's not actually the purpose of Ramadan, and our purpose as Muslims always goes back to the verse of the Quran where Allah says لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, that you develop more an awareness or a mindfulness regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So despite the discussions that we've had with Dr. Zafar today, many of them, or many of the things that have been highlighted here is predominantly in order for us to better our own health, which is of course an important discussion nonetheless. But as Muslims, from an Islamic point of view, we shouldn't fall prey to thinking that Ramadan is a month where we're focusing so much on our external that we forget about our internal, which is our iman. And I think this is what you've highlighted previously as well. I hope that our viewers have benefited from this. Dr. Zafar, your final thoughts, perhaps things that we haven't covered or things that you would like to present to our community?
No, I think just reiterating the fact that Ramzan isn't the time to try new things. So for me personally, it's not the time to try new activities, new diet. Really, it's about maintaining as much as possible the benefits in terms of your health that you've gained over the rest of the year as well, in terms of your fitness. So maintenance is key, and more importantly, be in control of what you're eating, and don't be tempted that you fasted all day and you have to reward yourself by eating lots of
Yeah.
samosas, and that's the key one. So I think you've been disciplined throughout the whole day. Equally, you should be disciplined when it comes to iftar and sehri as well.
Brilliant. Jazakumullah, Dr. Zafar, for your time on behalf of myself and MCEC Palmer's Green. We do know you're very busy, and just to have you speak to us, it's a great honor and a privilege for us as well. Inshallah, we hope to have you again on a podcast. And for our viewers, seeing as this is the first time we've delivered a program on such a platform, we would ask you kindly for your feedback, and if there's any other guests that you would also like to see during the course of Ramadan, or perhaps after Ramadan, whom we could interview and benefit from. Dr. Zafar, thank you immensely. It's been of great benefit for myself, and I do hope that our viewers also benefit from yourself tremendously as well.
Inshallah, and Jazakallah again for kindly inviting me.
Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.